Many people that enter polyamory, they're both curious, have an open mind, as well as they're progressive. Even though good intentions can be opening invitation for a relationship to be poly, you have to have agreements in order for the relationship to be stabilized. Because when you have unclear expectations, silent assumptions, mismatched boundaries, and undefined commitments, you are bound to have a recipe of a relationship that is going to struggle because it's going to be chaotic. Most people who enter polyamory relationship are pretty amateur and they are curious, but they also don't know what they don't know. Early on in your polyamory relationship, you are bound to make mistakes. And that is what we're going to explore. And we're going to figure out how to mitigate it so that you have a healthy polyamorous relationship. If this kind of conversation is helpful to you, go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel and turn on notifications. I post videos weekly about relationships, intimacy, and navigating non-traditional dynamics with nuance that you might not see in social media. The reason why polyamory relationship is considered complex is because there are so many moving parts to the relationship. You have to figure out time, scheduling, boundaries, and all of these things you have to hold simultaneously while also holding your own. And in different relationship contexts, whether it be with partner A to partner B or your partner's partner, all of these kind of dynamics makes it complicated. Even if you're in a monogamous relationship, there are still moving parts. Just polyamory relationship involves more people. And so the more you have in the system, more considerations you have to have. And so taking the weight of what it means to be so conscientious on so many areas, it is actually healthier to have a relationship that has agreements, because what does it do? It creates predictability, it creates accountability, and a sense of security in the relationship. What are the core components of agreements in polyamory relationships? And there are four. The first one is emotional safety. How you feel in the relationship is very important because it signals to you whether or not there's connection, closeness, or there's something that is getting in the way of that. Thus, the relationship feels very risky. Emotional safety is all about being able to communicate what you're feeling on the inside and authentically share it with your partner and know that your partner is going to be receptive. You might come across an experience where there's jealousy, there's friction, there's distance. You have to be able to talk about it and talk about it in a way that is safe for the both of you. So if there's any kind of minimizing or invalidation or just complete refusal, there is no emotional safety when you have those elements in the relationship. Another part of agreements is time and scheduling. As obvious as this sounds, when you open your relationship up to someone new, you get this thing called new relationship energy, and they get all of the priority and time and attention. But all of your relationships are important and they require due diligence too. And anything that is worth caring for and nurturing, you actually have to make sure to carve out the time to do it. Without it, the relationship starts to wither and become distant. You've lost track of what's happening within your dynamics with that person. Another core element of agreements is consent and boundaries. Consent is not something that you give just once and then you never have to give it again, or it's never talked about again. Because you're in a complex relationship, you need to constantly edit what you're willing to do for a relationship versus what you're not. And as maybe new partners comes and goes, you also have to figure out whether or not you want to participate in that. So consent is something that needs to be talked about often. And just because you agreed and consented today, you are absolutely allowed to withhold it and do it without punishment. The second part is boundaries. Boundaries is so vital because it teaches you how you want to be treated within the relationship and what to do when you're not being treated well. So without boundaries, people can run all over you, and then you're complicit in your own pain, and your partner is not learning how to respect you in a way that is meaningful. So agreements must ensure that there is consent and boundaries. And the final element of agreements is making sure that the attachment within the relationship is protected. What I mean by that, your security, what brought you two together, has to be stable, because without that, the relationship crumbles. And then you start experiencing a lot of trouble and conflict, or you start to outsource some of that attachment and security onto your other relationship. And that's not where it belongs. What's not supposed to happen is you outsourcing certain aspects of your relationship with others because there's a deficit in one relationship. Remember, if there is a deficit of some kind in your relationship, you must address it. And that is how you ensure the attachment is stable. And another aspect of that is making sure that you know what you can share and what not to share, what's private versus what needs to be transparently disclosed. Now, I want to go over 5 common mistakes that people in poly relationship might find themselves in. Number 1 is vague agreements. If you find yourself saying, oh, we'll respect each other, we'll communicate well, and we will be honest, that tells me what you value, but it does not tell me what it looks like. And you have to get into the weeds, because in order for you to know what respect feels like, you have to articulate that. Mistake number 2 is one-time agreement conversations. You started at the beginning of this year to go into polyamory relationship. You have beautiful agreements. And then it's a year later and those agreements have not been updated, talked about, or anything. And so what was a really good agreement in January no longer serves this relationship in December. And how do you go about fixing that? You talk about it. Just because you agree today does not mean that you are locked in as a contract for the rest of your life, never for it to be updated or edited. If you are in that kind of agreement, well, it needs to be fixed, because a relationship will only grow into resentment when you can't openly and honestly say, hey, this thing isn't working for me anymore. And this is what we need in order for us to have even more of a stable and healthy polyamorous relationship. Mistake number 3 is fear-based rules that are disguised as agreements. What I mean by that is you might notice that you might want your partner to call you, that you check each other's text messages, that you have to know every little detail because that's a part of the agreement. That actually is fear. And instead of talking vulnerably and understanding where that comes from and finding agreements that both people can come together to reassure and nurture, you start dictating your partner's behaviors. And the moment you start dictating your partner's behavior, you're in control land. You're no longer in agreement. You're trying to find ways to mitigate feelings on the inside by insisting that your partner changes. That is not agreement. Those are called control. Those are called demands. Sometimes that can even be punishment. Mistake number 4 is having unequal voice in the agreement. What I mean by this is that one partner sets all the terms. We are walking into the danger zone of coercion or exploitation. If one person is dictating everything, the other person is just following along, and guess what? You're going to experience resentment. Both people need to agree, and if one person isn't in agreement, you technically don't have a polyamorous relationship. And mistake number 5 is not having a repair system, protocol, or clause. Good people can make really terrible decisions that can compromise the relationship. Sometimes those intentions can rub up against a boundary that was established or an agreement that was established, and you have just broken an agreement. And it can hurt even worse when there's no actual repair. Because what's actually happening when you break an agreement or a boundary is that you have just created a rupture in your relationship, meaning that trust is being questioned, your connection is being questioned. Well, you need tools and you need to know how to actually go through it. And a relationship agreement that doesn't have repair protocol will absolutely cause you to start flailing. And then next thing you know, you're blaming each other. No one is feeling validated or heard. And then you just sweep it under the rug. I see so many couples in my practice who don't know how to repair that. All of these ruptures starts collecting, and that is oftentimes when most relationships come to an end. So now that we know what the common mistakes, here is a framework on how to establish agreements in your relationship. Want to think about all the most important areas of your relationship that just makes sense. You got time, you got attachment, you have emotions, you have conflict, all of these things that makes your relationship as good and sometimes as rocky. You want to have agreements. So you kind of get the lay of the land of what is most vital to your relationship and start working on figuring out what works for the relationship and what doesn't. And then you both agree to it. And if you can't both agree, you find ways to have compromises to find the best solution or the best agreement for the both of you. The other thing is that you have to check in on your relationship. If it's not weekly, then it needs to be every other week. It is vital. How do you know when something is working or not working? And how does your partner know that it's working or not working? Well, it can't be a mystery. It has to be communicated. And one of the best ways is to have regular check-ins in your relationship. If you find yourself needing to revise that agreement, this is the best time. Start talking about why it's working and why it's not. If you notice that you were blaming your partner, and that's the only part of the conversation that's being heard, you're not actually having that conversation, it's just turning into an accusation. So really work through what's working for me and why isn't it and how is it not working? And is there anything that we can tweak together that makes this agreement doable for the both of us? And think about your repair protocol. How does repair actually look in your relationship? What do we need to do? How do we carve out time? And how do we know that it is repaired? That last question is probably one of the most vital questions because sometimes you can feel hurt and it might still linger even after you've done all the repair work. So if I still feel this way after a week, is that an indicator for me that we haven't done the repair, or is there a need that didn't get to be fully expressed? If it's not obvious, all these agreements is the thing that makes your relationship thrive. It gives you the opportunity to breathe, to relax, and lean into the full richness of a polyamorous relationship. If you want to go deeper, visit my website at intimacyinprogress.com, where you will find therapeutic services as well as relationship tools. And if you haven't already, subscribe to this channel so that you don't miss future conversations like this.